Today, we are going over my 7 tips for how to emotionally get over hell. Hi, my name is Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director with a master's degree in theology, and most of the work that I do with clients is religious deconstruction. This is a part 2 video, so if you want the history of hell and why humans create heavens and hells, stop this video and go to part 1. This video is if you are in a place where, okay, logically, maybe hell isn't real. I can see that it's a mess in the Bible or the Quran. I can see how it arises from human nature and influences of what's going on in the culture, fine. But my subconscious is still afraid of hell. It's still showing up in my dreams. I'm still scared to move forward because what if I'm wrong? I still feel emotions of fear of hell. And I feel like it's deeply wired in my body, even though the rational part of my brain maybe doesn't believe or is skeptical. And this is where I see a lot of people get stuck, especially people who are intellectually processing out of religion. But so much of what we are as humans is not rational. And so if we are only deconstructing from a place of rationality, there's going to be a lot that going on that's unprocessed and we're going to get stuck. I'll give you an example from my personal life. I was raised Mormon. I lost faith in that religion by the time I was around 14, but it took me a lot longer to deconstruct all the conditioning from my early childhood. And one time I was on a walk, I think it was in my 20s, and I knew that I just wasn't moving forward, and I didn't know why. I was just kind of thinking about it. And deep in my gut, I felt this very male voice that said if I take another step in my deconstruction journey, I'm going to lose my family. And that's the idea of Mormon hell. It's not really fire and brimstone. It's this idea that you can be with your family only in Mormon heaven, and if you don't make it there, then you're not going to be with your family. Now, I didn't believe this rationally. I had left that belief a decade ago, but that idea had been so drilled into me as a child that it still lived on in my subconscious. And it was the reason that I wasn't really growing and moving forward, because I had this irrational subconscious fear that was still influencing me without me even realizing it. So today we're going to focus on that aspect, on how we actually process and shift away, not only from a rational belief in hell, but an emotional fear of hell, because we have to do both. So, the first thing that we need to do is recognize your early conditioning. So, what were the beliefs that were introduced to you in childhood, especially around concepts like eternal punishment? And this is just our emotional conditioning. And so, these early experiences shape our brains and our bodies by associating specific ideas like hell or punishment with feelings of fear and dread. And so, childhood is often when we absorb beliefs without filtering them rationally. So, these concepts are presented with high emotional charge, and they embed themselves in a very lasting way. This is why we can intellectually reject hell, but remnants of fear can still be triggered subconsciously. So write out in a journal entry what you were told about hell and just actually name it. Just spend some time naming this thing, because that takes it out of hiding in the subconscious and brings it into our conscious attention where we can work with it. So take out a piece of paper and talk this out with someone, however you do this. Think about this while you walk, just any way where you can get your body involved. This is what I was taught as a child. These are the images I remember. These are the feelings that I remember. Just bring it to the surface so that we can work with it. That's step 1. Number 2 is understanding your own brain. So again, just bringing things to the surface here so we can work with it. So when we dive into the psychology and neuroscience of fear conditioning, it helps us understand why a fear of concepts like hell or eternal punishment can remain with us even after we no longer believe them. This part of the process largely involves a small but powerful part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala's primary job is to respond to threats and store emotional memories, especially those connected to fear.
When the unexpected is staring you in the face, fear is there to keep you safe. With speed and wisdom, Fear assesses the situation and settles your nerves in his own special way. He's got this. Thank you, Fear.
But here's where it gets interesting. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between rational and irrational fears. It simply responds to whatever it perceives as a potential threat. So this is not a rational part of our brain. So imagine a child raised with repeated teachings about hell, where images of eternal punishment and fear-based stories are common. These repeated exposures create a strong emotional response, even triggering the body's fight or flight response. And over time, these pathways become become more ingrained, kind of like well-worn trails through a forest, making it easier and faster for our brains to connect the concept of hell or death with fear, even when we stop believing in hell as adults. And so what's happening here is that our brains have these built-in automatic responses or habits around these concepts, and these responses don't rely on rational thought. They're simply triggered because the neural pathways are so well worn. So even when we no longer rationally believe in hell or punishment, or at the very least, we're skeptical of this, these pathways can activate and continue to produce feelings of anxiety or fear, disturbing dreams, keep you from moving forward. And there's this disconnect then between our rational mind and our emotional brain, which can be really frustrating for people as our intellect has moved on, but our emotional responses haven't caught up. And so, to address this, psychologists use a concept called fear extinction, which is a way of going back and actively rewiring our brains to unlearn these fear-based pathways. And so fear extinction doesn't erase the original fear memories, but works by creating new non-fearful associations with the same concept. So for example, if thinking about death triggers fear, one can practice repeatedly associating that thought with a calming imagery, relaxation techniques, or even positive reflections on just the cycle of life and death. So, the idea here is to gradually build new pathways that link the idea of death or hell to feelings of calm or acceptance rather than fear. And over time, these new pathways become the brain's preferred routes, and the original fear based responses kind of fade into the background. And this is a process that requires a lot of patience and practice, but with intentional work, it's possible to have our emotional responses align more closely with our rational beliefs so that our brain is more whole instead of disconnected. And in the next steps, I'm going to explore ways that we can do this rewiring process. This is often the hardest part of deconstruction. It's when you've lost all your old beliefs, but the thought patterns are still there, and you actually have to go back and recreate your brain and get it working for you rather than against you. It's not enough. Like, if I could say anything about religious deconstruction, it would be this: it is not enough to just not believe anymore and walk out of the building. You actually have to go into your brain and give your brain some new thoughts and new options, or it's going to keep firing in the same old patterns. And that's going to show up in your life in a myriad of ways. So, number 3, we're going to reclaim old language and images to start rewiring your brain, especially images, because there's just something so emotional about images. So, we take something like the concept of fire representing hell, or phrases that we may have heard growing up that reinforce that fear, anything that, evokes strong feelings because they're tied to emotional memories. And these associations aren't set in stone. With intentional effort, we can kind of neutralize their power by reclaiming them in ways that feel safe and lighthearted and even empowering. So let's say the image of fire, for example, has been a symbol tied to the fear of hell. You might begin to draw or paint images of fire, but in ways that feel safe or even fun. Maybe you turn it into a cozy campfire setting, or use warm colors to make it feel less threatening. By taking control of the symbol and presenting it in a different context, you're sending the message to your brain that this image does not need to evoke fear. Here's an example from my own gallery wall, because I had some leftover imagery of the rapture from my time in Christianity. So now I have the Velocirapture, and it's taking this theme, this image that used to fill me with fear, and making it playful and telling my brain, look at this silly thing that humans do, with how we create stories that scare ourselves. We're so silly. And it actually calms down the fear response because we're telling our brain that these images are nothing to fear. So another approach, especially if you prefer language over images, is writing out to process these associations. So journaling about your experience with symbols, or writing out the phrases that you can remember, can help them to feel less powerful. And some people find it helpful to even add a humorous twist, like writing these phrases in a silly, exaggerated way, or pairing them with funny drawings. Humor can be a surprisingly effective way in neutralizing fear, because it encourages our brain to see the once threatening image or word as something harmless. And then lastly, visualization exercises can also be helpful, especially while you're walking. So if there's a phrase or image that still triggers fear, you might try imagining it in a safe, non-threatening way. So for example, if the word like damnation, like if you feel that word in your body, Picture yourself seeing it like written on a soft, colorful chalkboard or a sidewalk. Imagine yourself just like washing it away with water. Visualizing these triggers in harmless and especially humorous ways can start to rewire the brain's automatic responses. So, by regularly meeting these symbols in a controlled and non threatening context, we gradually teach our brain that these images and words are not something to be feared, so that we can dial back that amygdala response. And this is the process of reclaiming, which gives us power over our own reactions, helping us to dissolve the emotional power that these symbols once held. And then with each exposure, we're essentially rewriting our mental associations, allowing us to respond with calm rather than fear. Number 4 is inner child work. I have an entire course on inner child work and shadow work. So if you want to do a deeper dive into this space, I'll be honest with you, I have yet to meet a person deconstructing from religion who doesn't need to do inner child work and shadow work, because in religion you start repressing parts of you that aren't allowed into your shadow, and we call that part of you bad or fallen, and it's not integrated within you. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of repression. And then at various ages as a child, there were things you needed to say and hear that you didn't get. And you have to go back and we have to go back and reparent ourselves. So again, for more on that, I do a full course and a full workbook on that, and I'll link it in the comments. But for today, one way that we're doing that rewiring work is to talk to the little kid in you that is being triggered or being scared. And it sounds schizophrenic, which is why we don't do inner child work with kids or with teens, because it can start to make them feel very disconnected. But as adults, we can kind of handle the idea that these past pathways in our brain from previous selves still exist in our brain. So many times we have an emotion or a trigger or a warning sign, and it comes from a previous self with previous experiences all the way back into childhood. And so we essentially reparent and talk to and give gifts to and write to that part of us in our brain that is still a child. And so to begin this process, we create, a safe and calming environment where you feel grounded and open to self-reflection. And then once you're settled, you picture yourself at the age when you first remember hearing about hell or punishment. Maybe it was as a young child hearing about fire and brimstone, or some form of eternal separation from loved ones, which was more what my childhood was. And imagine what it was like to hear these ideas for the first time, and what it was like to take them seriously and internalize them as a real threat. You might recall specific images, words, even the tone of voice used by these authority figures. I know for me, it was a very male voice that was like, I could almost like hear it in my body because it was so ingrained in me. And then we imagine meeting this younger version of yourself as your present self. So you sit down with this child and you offer them compassion and let them know that they're safe, and explain to them gently in a way that they'd understand that the fear they felt made sense given the information that they had, but they aren't in danger, and they're free to release these worries, and it's okay. And this process is about acknowledging how vulnerable we were when we accepted these beliefs, which weren't rationalized but absorbed emotionally. And we offer empathy to this younger version of ourselves and validate their feelings and begin releasing that fear from our adult selves, talking to our inner child. So, one powerful exercise here is write a letter from your present self to your inner child. I even recommend like writing from the you now with your dominant hand and writing back to yourself in your non-dominant hand. That's a very visual way to do this. And in this letter, just assure them that what they heard wasn't the truth, and they don't have to carry the weight of these fears anymore. Let them know that they can let go of images and beliefs that once frightened them, and instead embrace a more peaceful view of life and death. And this can serve as a symbolic act, signaling to your subconscious mind that these fears no longer serve you. And so this inner child work can bring up strong emotions, and you can be patient with yourself. It takes time. It may need to be revisited, but with each interaction, you're healing these old wounds and allowing your adult self to live on without the shadow of these outdated fears. And so inner child work is kind of our journey back to our earliest conditioning, and then telling ourselves that like you didn't deserve to be scared like this as a child. For me, I remember the deep grief. One of my earliest memories is deep grief because I had an uncle who I'm still close to who wasn't Mormon, and he wasn't going to go to heaven with us. And I remember asking him to come to church with me in like my bravest 6-year-old voice because I was so scared that I wouldn't be able to see him in heaven. And when I was working with my fears directly, I would just say to my 6-year-old me, you didn't deserve to be told that some of your family didn't deserve heaven, especially your uncle that you loved very much and who has always been kind and sweet to you. And that wasn't meant for children to have on their shoulders, and it shouldn't have happened. And then that helps that part of me not feel triggered and undo that conditioning. All right, number 5, dreams. If you don't remember your dreams, if you've never done lucid dreaming, if hell has never shown up for you in your dreams, you can skip this one. But I wanted to add this specifically because I have so many clients for whom hell shows up in their dreams and hell shows up in psychedelic trips. And because dreams can be a window and psychedelics can be a window for things going on in our subconscious, we can actually work with them, especially in the dream space. And again, for a deep dive into dream work, I have a full course on that too. But just for today, dreams can feel uncontrollable, but we can actually work with them consciously to start changing the narrative. So, first, it's helpful to view these dreams as a natural way for your mind to process these deeply held fears, even if you've intellectually moved past them. And so, dreams don't operate in the same way as our rational or waking minds do. They're more of just like reflections of our emotional landscape. And so, how we get into this space is something called lucid dreaming, or this idea of being aware that you're dreaming while you're still asleep. And it takes practice, but many find that they can change their dreams or reduce the intensity of the fear by recognizing that the dream is not real. So, before you go to sleep, you set an intention that you may tell yourself, I can remind myself at any time that this is a dream. And this intention helps you to stay conscious within the dream and even rewrite it. Another approach is to reframe the content of these dreams while you're awake, especially in that space between sleep and dreams at night or in the morning where you can kind of play in that space. And you can try revisiting an old powerful dream or a recurring dream by bringing up, just visualizing it and then consciously rewriting the story. So, for example, I have clients who frequently dream of fire or being trapped in a dark place. And so I actually will help them to imagine themselves in the dream, but then visualizing bringing in light, finding an exit, having a loved one or an animal companion guiding you to safety. And these exercises can help reduce the emotional charge that's attached to these dreams. So, your dreams are this feedback system of your subconscious letting you know what still needs processing. And if these images persist, it may be a sign that there's still some underlying emotions that you haven't fully addressed, like fear of rejection or fear of judgment or fear of just like floating in the abyss or fear of, I have people who have actually have dreams where they are physically on fire. And that's very scary to go to sleep and have that recurring dream. So, dreams can be a powerful tool for understanding and healing from old conditioning. And by actively reframing and engaging with them, you can gain a greater sense of peace and control. And over time, these dreams lose their power and even transform into moments of self assurance and release. And that will show up in your dreams too. Again, this bit is most appropriate for those who dream about hell. I have many clients who are like rational atheists during the day, and then at night they're burning in hell. And we can actually work with that so you're not so disjointed between your rational mind and your dream mind. Okay, number 6, reframing death as a natural part of life. This is done best, honestly, by just spending time in nature and noticing that everything dies. Everything has a season, everything is connected. A flower rises and blooms and fades and dies. And then something else gets to experience existence with those elements, and we all take turns. And right now, you're alive, so it's your turn. Sometimes the element was a part of a tree and it basked in the sun, or it was an otter, or it was a human. And we don't need to hold on to any kind of faith in reincarnation to run from death because of our fear, especially fear of hell. So maybe something happens after we die. I think probably not, because we're a part of nature and it seems as if everything dies. But even without reincarnation, we can still see that just death is a part of life. If things didn't die, there would be no room on this earth for you to have a turn with existence. If every insect that has ever lived was still alive, you wouldn't even be able to see through the mosquitoes. So the process of life and death is so natural. Nature is doing this on its own all the time, and we're a part of nature. So spending time in nature and noticing this can help our bodies and brains become more at peace with being a part of nature rather than thinking that we are this separate thing, which is how we were raised, especially in Christianity. We're raised that we're separate from nature and we have this separate story that doesn't apply to everything else. So, for example, the preciousness of a flower is because it blooms for a week and then it dies. We don't give each other silk flowers or concrete flowers and say to each other, "This, I'm giving you this flower because it's going to last forever." The preciousness of the flower is that it's blooming now and in a week it'll die. And so we can start to look at ourselves and other people as flowers, just these little buds full of promise, blooming flowers, wilting flowers, and it's a natural part of life. And so spending time in nature and noticing that can help undo this story that we hold in our brains and deep in our bodies that we are separate because that was the story that we were told as children. And so we actually have to go back into nature. All right, last one, number 7, creating new rituals, especially around death. So rituals scientifically help us to process emotions out of our bodies, but it also helps us to mark values. So some rituals, words, phrases, art, funerals mark the value that some people are going to hell, but some people are going to heaven, and you need to be one of the ones that goes to heaven, right? It's probably all around you if you were raised in a religious home. And this fear ritual keeps these institutions powerful because they sell you a sickness and then they can sell you a cure. And so we have to develop new rituals, which you're going to need because you're going to be around death for the rest of your life. Like there's no escaping this. And so we need new ways to mark values and process death emotionally so we don't just have our old thought patterns and old rituals, which include a lot of hellfire. So many, many times I've had clients who are doing just fine in their deconstruction, and then their dad dies, and then they have no new rituals to process this. And so we have to develop that side of things, even though they felt like they were doing just fine in their life and with their deconstruction before that, because they can find that, dad dies. Now I don't have any way to process this death. Now I'm thinking about death and I don't have any tools for, am I actually going to go to hell? Am I not going to see my dad again because I'm in hell because I lost my belief? And it can really spiral people. So think of it this way. Your subconscious has been trained to associate certain symbols and rituals with fear. Maybe certain words or objects bring up anxiety. And even if you don't believe in their original meaning anymore. And so we actually have to do this rewiring by having new rituals around the concept of death. So first, we just identify something that represents comfort or peace or joy to you now. This may be an object or a color, an element from nature, a song, a quote, and then we incorporate these symbols into rituals that feel safe and empowering. So for example, if nature is a source of comfort, maybe create a small ritual around lighting a candle that has like a pine scent or something as a way of grounding yourself and reminding yourself you're alive today and you're part of nature and you're connected to all this. That's a new story. That's a new ritual that we can do over and over that can then become our regular brain pattern rather than our old brain pattern. And so we can even say a particular phrase and repeat it in the morning. I have one that I say in the morning. I say memento mori every morning. Just remember that you will die. And it helps me to focus my day on what I want to be spending my time on. And that's a new ritual that does a couple things. For one, it focuses me on how I want to be spending my life. So it decreases the shock value around death. It connects me, it gives me purpose. And now I don't have these old kind of fear or death narratives show up in my brain at all. And so what this process looked like personally for me, just overall, is doing guided meditations that worked with death, spending time in nature, focusing on the preciousness of life. And I have a lot of images around me of flowers and skulls because that image to me represents life and death together. Paying attention to fears that come up in my dreams, telling my inner child it's okay when she gets scared or old feelings come up, playing with the concept of death so that there's an element of humor, reclaiming some of these old scary images. all these things working together with doing the logical side, which I talked about in my previous video, where we understand the history of hell and how hell developed, helped me not only to move forward, but like march forward with a brain that was working for me rather than a brain that was working against me because of old fear wiring. So fear of hell, or fear of being wrong, and all of that inner chatter totally went away for me, to the point where if like during this video Jesus like appeared on the horizon, I wouldn't have fear. Like I wouldn't have fear in meeting my maker as an atheist. A god worthy of worship wouldn't create a hell to populate anyways. And so I'm just fully at peace, not only with hell and images of hell and narratives of hell, but even death itself. And we have to do both the emotional side and the rational side. So I hope this list helped. Grab a few of these activities to do on your own. And for deeper dives, check out some of the courses that I mentioned in the video. I think I mentioned the shadow work course and the dream course. And then I'll see you next week.